My name is Robin Petty. I'm the executive director for TOPA, and I'm also an education disability advocate. I'm a licensed social worker, LMSW. Um, I've been, for those who know me, I'm also a wheelchair user, so I have, a lot of personal experience in ADA related matters, Social Security, disability related things, and I've worked with Marty Sirkill for since going back to 2009 on, uh, helping his clients, with any questions or the process of applying for Social Security and just trying to be a resource and answer those questions. So, this presentation is kind of based on basic, like a consultation that I would have with somebody, with a parent or a person who's looking to apply for disability for whatever reason. So it's a lot of information that I put out there, and it's designed to help the parents, the clients, kind of teach them how to fish, so to speak, because just like education advocacy, the this system, the Social Security Administration, is supposedly designed for, the layperson to approach and be able to do without getting an attorney, without getting an advocate, without doing any of those things. But just like in IDEA world, special education world, it's just chocked full of things that aren't common knowledge and actually things that go against some common knowledge. It has its own definitions. It is full of acronyms. And those things are really unique. A lot of those things are really unique when it comes to Social Security. So, um, I'll show some resources at the end of this presentation. It'll also have all my contact information. So if you ever, have a question, just reach out and I'll do my best to point you in the right direction. But here we go. So, uh, let's. Mhm. Okay. So right now we're gonna break down the procedures of applying for entitlement, benefits to better understand the process. And I kind of spoke about this as the challenge for professional advocates, attorneys that deal with special education. It's like you got to set aside your understanding of what disability is and what people are required to do in order to, set aside those preconceptions so that you know, you can function in the SSA's realm without beating your head against the wall. And first of all, we'll go through some definitions. So the Social Security Act of 1935, part of the New Deal, it's the base part of these of entitlement programs. So Title II of the Social Security Act is for Social Security Disability Insurance, better known as SSDI. And this is specifically for adults who have enough quarters of work history, so quarters being quarters of a year of work history, and pay FICA taxes, so payroll taxes. And those things are both important. Um, Normally, it takes 20 quarters of work history, so that's like 5 years of work history and paying FICA taxes to qualify for SSDI benefits. Um, and sometimes, depending if it's a young person that becomes disabled, you can get qualified on fewer quarters. Um, and but generally speaking, it's about 5 years of work history. Um, and paying FICA taxes isn't not everybody does that. Not every profession does that. So big ones are railroads, anybody working for as a in the state Texas state education system, you're under a different system, and there's a lot of employees out there in the workforce that may not realize that they're not paying FICA taxes and they have the whatever employment sector that they're in has its own retirement benefits and its own disability insurances. And there, a lot of them are really similar to Social Security, but not exactly. So not everybody is able to not every worker is able to apply for SSDI. And, it's just something to keep in mind. But you are eligible if you pay FICA taxes and you have enough quarters. But for this presentation, we're going to primarily talk about Title 16, which is supplemental security income. A lot of people think SSI stands for something else that has to do with Social Security insurance or something like, anything like that. But this is supplemental security income. So it's important to understand like what the point of SSI is, what the point, who it's for, and why it exists. So it's in its basic levels, it's for children and adults who have a qualifying disability and who have limited income and resources. There's you can expand that to talk about the specific individuals, children and adults who would qualify, but that's in general terms, people who don't have work history, people who children obviously are included in this, people over 65, um, with that don't have a spouse or somebody that has those work credits that they can get onto. Some immigrants, can at age 65 can apply for SSI. So at its base, it's for people who have the limited income and resources. And we'll kind of touch on that a little bit. So let's go a little bit more into definitions. Okay, so we talked about, let's say a qualifying disability. So that for children who have a qualifying disability, well, forget what you know about disability because here we go. So a medically determinable impairment. So this is a diagnosis from a doctor. Whether it's a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a cardiologist, physical or mental condition. This is a diagnosis from a physician or PhD type. Nurse practitioner is not going to work. A LPC is not going to work. These are medical doctors and your MDI is required, and so you can't even begin this process if you do not have you won't get very far in this process if you do not have history with some kind of physician or mental health doctor. So it has to have that objective medical evidence, which, is reported by the doctor through the signs that they see, the laboratory tests, both, and it's an acceptable medical source, which is just basically it's a doctor. Um, and so that impairment, the MDI, um, you become disabled under their rules if a person's unable to engage in any substantial gainful activity, which is SGA, due to an MDI that is expected to last for a continuous period of at least 12 months or expected to result in death. So, you know, and just to, we keep kind of breaking down these definitions. Substantial gainful activity or work is, this is not occasionally I get an odd job or anything like that. This is you're performing a job within the national economy, um, and it's it's a physical or psychological oh, so it's a you get wages for it. So you're getting wages, and it has to a worker has to be able to perform the duty, perform the work without interruptions from physical or psychological impairments. um, this is a full work day, a full work week. You can't work 3 weeks a month and then, your condition flares up and, you can't go in for a week or you can't be around individuals or, you're having whatever the case may be. It keeps you from working that consistent position, and essentially no employer is going to keep you around. So that doesn't count. That's not work. And then currently in 2025, the SGA amount, if we go back to that, you're earning SGA in the national economy if your earnings are above $1,620 a month. Um, so in a nutshell, you are eligible for disability if you are unable to work earning SGA and you have that medically determinable impairment from a doctor that it is objectively expected to last 12 months or it's going to kill you. Um, so how do like the process for just beginning an application, it's the same for whatever program you're applying for. So whether it's SSDI or SSI, the application begins in the same place, and that is on the best place to do it is online. You can always go into your local Social Security office and start the application, but vast majority started at SSA.gov. You go and you create a My SSA account, and then you find the portal for submitting a disability claim online. And the first stage of this application process is, it's collecting basic info about the applicant. And what it's doing is it's just determining, they're using this information to determine your eligibility for what program, and then also collecting information about the doctors that you've seen, the why you've seen these doctors, the doctors' addresses, their phone numbers, because they're going to use this information at a later stage to then contact each one of these offices and get records. So they'll talk a little bit about it. Sometimes the application can go ahead and include, basic work history, um, and activities of daily living. Um, when and just to as an aside for like workers who are applying for SSDI, you see work history and you think, man, they want to know exactly who I've worked for, and that's not it at all. So they want work history because they want to identify the type of work that you're doing and then classify that type of work into their evaluation process. There's sequential evaluation process. So they're going to classify the type of work that you do in order to determine whether your medical impairment is going to keep you from doing that same type of work. And then, depending on the person's age, if you can no longer do that type of work, whether it's like a heavy lift, heavy construction, or being on your feet all day, which is kind of it's light work, but you're on your feet all day as a cashier or a weight, how much you carry around every day. If you lift boxes of copy paper, how often do you do that? So they're putting you into a classification of, well, if your disability is too much that you can't do that work, could you possibly do easier level of work? And depending on your age, like, how easy would it be to retrain you to do another job? If you can do a sedentary job instead of being on your feet all day. And so they're really teasing out, what you've done, as far as work history. And um, hold on. Okay, so yeah, so what you've done, and then based on your age, what you might be able to do alternatively, um, considering your condition. Uh, Congratulations, anybody under the age of 50, you're considered young to the Social Security Administration, and like day 49, like year 49, day 364, you are a young person. And the next day, you are now approaching advanced age. Tech, and like literally, that's kind of what they call it. So you're older, you're approaching advanced age, which means you're less likely to be able to easily be trained to do something else. So anybody under 50 is just pretty much under any adults under 50 just treated the same way, no matter your background, experience, level of formal work. You're considered easily retrained to do any other job than the one you were doing, if they can determine that your condition would allow for that. So they, this first part of the application, they're collecting this information. Uh, and once you submit that, this online application is sent to a person's local field office, and that's determined by zip code. Uh, so, and most people have a general idea of like, well, oh, I know where that Social Security office is or whatever, but it's easily found by going to a field office locator, and I'll pull that up real quick. Here. Okay, so yes, here's the field office locator. Um, I type in my zip code, and it's going to tell me and give me a lot of information on this specific field office. So my field office is in Houston. It tells me a number. But I know just from my experience that that is the main Social Security number. So that's a number that anybody would call to get a hold of Social Security. So that's not very helpful. However, there's a fax number, which is most likely the field office. So every field office, their information is going to look different. Sometimes they have the phone number to that field office, which is great. You don't have to dig around for it. You don't have to wait an hour online or on the phone with the main number just to speak to somebody and leave a message for somebody at that field office, or hopefully they can tell you the number to that field office. Some of them publish it and some of them don't. And I don't know why it's not uniform, but it's not. So um, so this will give you information about their hours. Some have different hours. Some are closed on Wednesdays. Some are only open from 12 to 4 on certain days. So just getting a general sense of where it is and what their hours are will tell you, this is where that online claim or the online initial application is going to be sent to begin working up. So let's go back to okay. So it's sent to the local field office. And all right. So if you filed an SSDI application, this is you don't really have much more to do. And They might send you like a form to like type it's a HIPAA type form, which would allow them to get your medical records, and they'll use it as a release of information form to send to doctors. And by the way, doctors' offices are required by law to respond to Social Security's request for records. So um, you should never stress about having to collect your own records and going to, getting all the medical records together for the Social Security Administration, because you just leave that to them. They're pretty good at it, and they have a way where they can contact the doctor's office, and the doctor's office faxes it back, and with a barcode, and immediately goes into the person's claim and notifies the people working on the claim that, hey, there's records to review and things like that. So let them do that job. Okay, here's where a whole heck of a lot of SSI claims go to die, is because the Social Security Administration will send they're working up that eligibility, right? And so people who are eligible for SSDI, the worker stuff, their application goes on to the next step. The people who aren't eligible for that program get in the mail, they receive a letter in the mail. On the first correspondence they're going to open and see is boom, they're not eligible for disability. It's they're just what? Okay. Like I have no idea why. It doesn't say, it just says I'm not eligible. But it's talking about SSDI, and it'll even say SSDI. But to this point, like nobody, there's not like a, a, a online education with the application that you're filling out that tells you specifically, the differences in the programs. You just know you're applying for disability. So a person gets this in the letter, and a lot of time, or gets this in the mail. A lot of times they're just, okay, I'm done. I don't know what else to do. But unfortunately, is an extra step required. And the S, in my experience, the Social Security Administration is not going to inform you about it. They're not going to reach out and they're saying, "Oh, we have to finish the SSI application. We have to do the interview." Um, they just won't, and they're overwhelmed. Especially in 2025, they've historically, I've never seen them do this, but even now more, like they have fewer workers. Their caseloads are extreme. Um, and, so I always tell people, you know, the Social Security Administration's working on your claim because they just sent you correspondence. And if it's an SSI claim, this is the signal of now you reach out to them at the local office, you find out what your local office is, and you go down there and you wait in line, and you get somebody on the phone at that office and you tell them like, now I need to set up the SSI portion of the interview. And it's basically it's that this part of the interview is to really determine whether you have the assets available to you that would keep you from being eligible for SSI. So, as an individual, do you have over $2,000 in your bank account? Do you have more than one car as an individual? Do you have rental property that you have access and you get rental income from? Um, do you have a boat? Do you have a jet ski? Like, do you have recreational vehicles that you know could be, instead of you declaring that you don't have the assets or resources, they're looking at destitute people. So they would say you need to sell your boat or jet ski before you can be eligible for this stuff. For couples, that it's a little more, of course. It's $3,000 in a bank account, and you can have the two individuals can have two cars, but um, it's not much. I mean, the program is absolutely designed for people who don't have income and assets, resources. And so a lot of times when parents are applying for their children with disabilities, this is, they're earning too much money to be able to apply. And so in those cases, as soon as the child turns 18, uh, that's when they would be able to be eligible to apply on their own Social Security number. So it's a lot of people have to wait for that specific day, the 18th birthday, to be able to start applying and start the process for their kid, no matter how severe the disability is. Um, and I'm not going to really get into it, but there's some people look into emancipating their children in order to help them, get on those roles quicker. But that's complicated. That's can, be an expensive process if you need an attorney. Um, and there's pitfalls to everything. So, uh, essentially going back to setting up that interview, you have to knock on their door. You have to be a really squeaky wheel in order to set up the next stages of getting you know getting going down the road towards getting your claim reviewed. And once a person does get past that, the field office then for application process part two. So here's the next step. So the field office then sends the claim to what's called Disability Determination Services. And DDS is, all around the country, there's numerous DDS offices. Texas has its own. Arkansas has its own, a lot of states have their own. And then there's some states that share, like 3 states will share one DDS. Um, but essentially, the idea is that um, your your claim will go to your state's DDS. Now, in 2025, you know, we had Texas and somewhere where disability claims taken over 400 days to be approved, and which is insane. So what sometimes will happen is they'll send a Texas claim to Arkansas because their their caseload is just they're doing things quicker, or they just don't have the overwhelming caseload. So there are occasions where it'll be outsourced, but it's still always it's always the same rules. It's all Social Security rules, all federal guidelines under the Social Security Act that are determining these claims. Um, so the field office will send it to a DDS to start the whole actual working of the claim. We've determined the eligibility, and now we're looking at the merits of the claim. So the form, like self-reporting forms, are sent out to claimants, and I'll talk about those in a couple slides. And at this point is when DDS starts to reach out. They'll start to send requests for medical records to any and all of the offices that you've listed. And it's a great idea to list any and all doctors that you have seen. But it's important to keep in mind that the older medical records, they look at them and they consider them, but any medical records for a physical condition that's older than a year, or any medical records for a mental health condition that's older than 2 years, will not be enough, will not be enough on their own to determine a disability claim. You need updated records. So, it's important to have, to be seen by a doctor within, um, a reasonably a reasonable amount of time in the past to have updated, diagnosis, current, levels of functioning according to the doctor. So it's important to have this to have these to have these records, but not everybody does. I mean, not, so in the case of you only have older records, they'll look at those and they'll consider them. But in order to get the most updated information, if that person's not seeing a doctor, or if the doctor that they're seeing, the medical records they've sent in don't cut, don't don't cut it, um, then the Social Security Administration will send that person to what's called a consultative exam, a CE, with with a doctor that um, with whatever doctor is available and contracted with them that will understand whatever condition the applicant is, using to as a basis for applying for disability. So, you got a heart claim, you'll go to a cardiologist, and a lot of times it's really, you got a claim of anxiety or general anxiety disorder, and they're not saying that these conditions don't exist, but they don't have updated records, or they don't have good records on what's going on at this time. So, you know, I've, you fortunately, you're going to go see a doctor. Unfortunately, it's just going to be this one appointment snapshot in time where you're going to see somebody that has no idea about you other than the records that they get from the SSA, to prove your entire claim, your entire application, at that moment in time. And there's, other than you establishing care with a doctor that's understanding what you're going through and understanding that they need to be meticulous with notes and meticulous with prognosis, and keeping great records, and understanding that they need to note all the medications that you tried yet failed, or all the times that they tried to work but it didn't work out, that some doctors and some other physicians, they keep great records, but a lot, they're overwhelmed too. So a lot of them are just like very succinct, and they just don't hold the kind of objective information that the SSA really needs to push your claim over to be approved. Um, so it's just something to keep in mind. Um, So the medical records start arriving at DDS, and this is the first part of the evaluation process, where they look at your impairment, that MDI that is in the medical records now. They're gonna say, well, we have this whole book of listings of it's called the SSA Blue Book. It's known as the SSA Blue Book. And we have listings of all these impairments um, that would, if the criteria were met, your claim would go straight to go, and you'd collect your $200 of Monopoly money. But in all seriousness, let's see, I'll just bring it up. So they'll look at this listings, and I have links to these in the end of the presentation. But so it's a listing of impairments, and for each major body system, um, consider they have a criteria. If the impairments are considered severe enough to prevent an individual from doing that SGA, and your claim will just be approved. You don't need self-reports. You just, like, a doctor has identified you with these things. And we'll take a look at adult listings. And you can see how these are there. by body systems. Uh, so, and they'll have mental disorders all together. So they have all these body systems. And within those, they have like um, the specific impairments. So let's say schizophrenia, okay? Um, so medical documentation of these things, which has to be, again, noted in the medical documentation by the physician, and um, you know, they have these other impairments. So the listing is met if A and B are present, or C. And a lot of, so a lot of them are like that. Um, let's see. I won't go too much into the weeds on this, but the idea is that they have very specific criteria for almost every condition that you could think of as being a disabling a condition or disabling enough to like keep a person from working, from earning that SGA. Um, so if they can meet a listing directly, like diagnosis X, it meets our criteria, claim is approved. Or they can equal a listing for because, things are constantly changing. So if they can, if they're creative enough to where the records for some kind of condition that may not specifically be in the listings book, but the symptoms and the signs and the are all there that would equal that of another listing. A lot of it happens in mental disorders or like uh, neurological disorders. Then they'll equal that listing, and they'll say, okay, well, this fits in this category well enough that we can reasonably approve it. Um, so that's the first step of sequential evaluation for any claim. Now, most claims don't meet a listing. So that's where self-reporting forms come into play. So, and we're really talking about SSI forms, so we're not really worried about the whole work history stuff. Uh, those aren't, like a lot of people just, and obviously children they're not going to make you fill out a work history form. But function reports, now function reports are, this is basically activities of daily living. Um, when it comes to children's claims, they, I'll go ahead and go into this. Uh, or special education records, they'll part of the application that you filled out online indicated whether the claimant has special education records and where would they be. And they can contact the school for special education records. And I will add, like, you should get those records because schools aren't obligated by the law to respond to the Social Security Administration. And in my experience, like a lot of those requests that are sent to school are just outright, ignored or just not seen or just not fulfilled. So getting special education records are important to see, like what the functioning of the kid is, or the young adult that was in special education prior to the age of 22. um, Having those records ready to submit, it can be helpful. Again, no claim is going to be proven by special education records. They're not going to only rely on those. They're still going to need, a current treating physician and those records but they will weigh heavily, um, you know, and given specific situations and for specific conditions that, behavior stuff like mental health things, like these special education records go a long way in kind of giving them the workers insight into like what's going on with this particular claimant historically. Um, so let's just take a look at some of these things. Okay, so Social Security forms. All right, there are so many of them. But the ones we're going to talk about are, um, if we're talking about function reports. So an adult function report is pretty self-explanatory. Mm, come on now. All right, well, we'll let that load. But for children, they break it down into life stages. So you have child birth to first birthday, or yeah, birth to first birthday, 1 to 3, 3 to 6, 6 to 12, 12 to 18. And with these function reports, obviously it's a primary caretaker who's going to be the best person to fill out these reports. Um, so let's go with this adult function report. Um, and I'll just point out like so this is, it's a little demographics, where do you live? But then it just goes into um go away. It goes into, let's talk about your activities of daily living and your functions. So the whole point of this form is to for the claimant to be able to explain on that when their condition is such that they're going to be unable to work. Like this is what I tell people. It's like you're filling out this form because you're having like your condition is causing you to have a bad day, and it's the day that you're gonna not be able to work for whatever reason. Um, and so they start by, okay, how does it limit your your ability to work? And they, nice block size paragraph. Okay, that's cool. You can reasonably explain that using the 7 lines they give you. The next one is like describe what you do from the time you wake up until going to bed. And I have never met somebody who could put that so succinctly, yet provide good information within 3 lines. And mind you, like these forms are um, they're being mailed to, they're mailing these on paper to the claimant, and you get them, and they'll say, hey, you have, you know, till next Tuesday to fill out these forms because it's already been in the mail. And so all this time has gone by, and then they're, like a person's applying for disability, they're already facing whatever condition they have and dealing with that. And now they feel like this stress of like, oh my gosh, I gotta complete this form and get it back to them, and I'm already behind so I'm just gonna jump into this and um and fill it out. So I tell people like just take a breath. Okay. First of all, fill out like the more information that you can provide in these forms, detailed information, the better your claim is going to be. The person who is working up the claim is never going to meet you or talk to you or meet your kid or, this is all on paper is what they're seeing. And so you can't change what's in a medical record, but you can sure explain in very good detail, like how conditions affect you or affect your kid or, the milestones that they missed. You can get on a open up Google Docs and just say, okay, I'm answering number 6, and you can just type, like write it here. See attached document for all of these, see attached document. So they'll have you talk about, personal care. They'll have you talk about, um, what kind of reminders are needed. How do you prepare your own meals? Do you do housework, yard work? How do you get around when you go out? How far can you walk? Uh, how do you do your shopping? Are you able to manage your finances? Um, what are your hobbies and interests? What were your hobbies and interests before you became disabled? Or, how have these things changed? What are your social activities like? And there are just some questions that really do carry a lot of weight, but they're kind of like they're almost innocuous. Like, you have a problem getting along with people, that says a lot about a person and their ability to go out into the public and work. So if they have a corresponding diagnosis of some kind of borderline personality thing, or and they're really, the doctor is talking about it, and then the claimant themselves is like, "Oh, I, I hate people. I go off on people, and the smallest things will set me off." And um, like how well do you follow instructions? How well do you get along with authority figures? I can't stand bosses. Like I get in fights with my bosses or my coworkers all the time. Have you ever been fired or laid off, from a problem getting along with other people? And then some really important ones, like how do you handle stress? You have one line to say, how do I handle stress? Well, you know, a person with some kind of behavioral um, challenges, they don't handle stress well. Or, a person who's in pain, that's for much of the day, like they're not going to handle um, stress sometimes, the stress that comes with fast-paced working or things like that. Do you have unusual behaviors or fears? So these are the whole form is just designed to like really give a picture of who the claimant is, and then I can't stress it enough when I talk to people is like don't don't put on rosy glasses to explain it. Like I'm a social worker, so I'm all about like highlighting your strengths and things, but that's not what they're asking. If you want to talk about how strong you are and how you pull up your boots and you make it happen, well, they're going to read that and they're going to be like, well, you're basically describing that you push yourself through it and you're still able to do all the things you need to do. No, this is about a bad day. This is that day that's gonna have that, keep you from that consistent level of work. Um, and again, this is the adult form. So let's just take a look at real quick the like a function report for a kid, 6 to 12. So, most likely it's going to be the caretaker. It's going to be mom, that will talk about um, milestones, and again, filling this out on a word processing document and throwing in the kitchen sink, do it. Like the people doing this job know that the biggest reason that claims are denied is for a lack of information. And so if somebody is just putting one word answers on this, it's just not helpful. It's not helpful to them. They're not saying, if you get denied, they're not saying we don't believe you. It's just like th this is an exhaustive process and they can't just toss claims out the window because they don't like what's being said. They actually have to prove to a certain degree to that objective standard that they have that the claim can be denied. Or if they just can't tease any more information out of a claim, they've looked at it for 400 days, they've sent somebody to consultative examinations, more than one for more than one condition, and they get back all of this info and they still cannot, they know that this person has a problem, but they can't objectively say that it's risen to the level of, you couldn't do other work or the same type of work. And so again, that's most claims are denied due to these things. So I just say, provide them with more information than you think they need. You don't need to exaggerate. You don't need to embellish because, oftentimes that'll be clear where the medical records and the self-reports don't match up. And so they look at that and they're like, it's an inconsistency that they don't like to see. However, if you're talking about, the bad days that, again, are keeping the person that would keep a person from working or being able to function in a work environment, then that's what they want to know. These are real things that happen to this person that that prevent them from, you know, having a position that earns substantial gainful activity and lets them participate in the national economy. And that's just the whole point of these entitlement programs is just, can they, does their MDI prevent them from earning SGA? And, and if that answers yes, then the claim obviously is going to be approved. But getting there is a really long journey. And so let's talk about that a little bit. Um, let me look at these. Yeah, agreed, Lois. So using so Lois says, the 3373, it's a great intake form for just understanding your own clients, and understanding the challenges that they have. So if you can get somebody to fill in that, you'll collect a lot of really great information. That's a great point. Okay, let's see. Okay. No, no, no. Let's go back. All right. So we, like they looked at whether it meets a listing, and now no miss listing is met. They still have if you're at this point, they've determined that yeah, your medical records do show you have an MDI. You have that impairment. And this current, like we believe you that you have this thing. But how it affects you, that's where the self-reporting comes in. That's where um, these parent-teacher questionnaires, I add parent-teacher because you can have more than one person fill these things out. So if you can get a special education teacher to fill out one of those forms, um, and like on uh, how a child is, how they see this child in addition to the caretaker. Again, that's just another point of data that they want and that come together to form this picture that proves these claims. Okay, so I have some kind of tips here. Right. Okay, so we kind of talked about this. Properly completing forms, it's vital. Like if you can't shortcut those, if you're not going to meet a listing, if you're sure you're not going to meet a listing, these forms are absolutely vital. Um, and because it's that lack of information. Um, so let's see. And I just want to also point out. That's these forms. Okay, let's look at this. So 3380. Okay. So we talked about the 3373 is that it's a first party form. So it's like the person who's applying for disability is completes that form. But they don't there's all these other forms that are really cool that they don't send you and that they don't ask for. But if you find them and you fill them out, they're amazing because this the third party form is like, okay, you have your adult, son that just turned 18 complete his forms, or you help them complete his forms and fill them out from his perspective. But there's also another objective perspective, the caretaker or the mom or the spouse, like that it's the same questions that's in the other form, except it's in third party. How do you see this person dealing with these things? How do you like what problems do they have? And these forms are going to have different answers. And that's the cool thing about them, when they're used properly is because, it just corroborates some information. And also, like, while a claimant may, the claimant themselves may downplay some aspect or may not have the awareness or insight on some aspect of their condition and how it affects them, but the other person that's around them all the time sure does and sure can talk about it. And then that'll make sense when they're evaluating these claims. It'll make sense to the person working up the claim that, okay, I get it. Like this person does, have some real issues. Let's see what teachers reports. Let's see if we can get a teacher. Yeah, teacher questionnaire. There we go. So this is usually when they do try to get when they try to get special education records, they will send out these teacher questionnaires. No teacher except one that just has so much time on their hand and is just so involved is going to stop and fill out these with any kind of um, proficiency. They're not going to fill them out first because they're not required. So you taking this form, printing it out, and taking it to them and saying, please, this is super important. Um, I really need you to complete this form to help, this application process. Seeking them out and asking directly, like that'll get it done. Usually, they might refuse and they might hate you, um, but more often than not, they're professionals and ask them in a really nice way and give them an ETA of when you need it completed by. Like that's absolutely worthwhile. Um, so this is another point. So we're talked about, and I'll go back to my tips here. So we talked about uh, when the DDS sends these forms out, that'll have a cover letter for the package, and it'll just say, your claim is now with the DDS, and it'll have like nice what they want from you, and we've attached some forms, and we need you to fill them out. At the bottom of this letter, it'll have somebody's name on there. It'll have their name, and that's the person like evaluating this. It's the single individual evaluating your claim at DDS. It'll have their extension, it'll have a number to contact this person, and you won't be able to contact them directly. Uh, Maybe in the past you could have actually, you know, talked to this person, but calling that number, you will be able to leave a message for that person that'll get put directly into the notes of the claim. So I always tell people, when you get those forms, you get that number, you call it immediately and you say, "Hey, I got these forms. It says I need to get them back like really soon. I'd like a little I'm working on them. I'm going to need a little more time. They're happy to grant that to you. They'll say, okay, yeah, no, we're not going to close the claim if you don't get them back, by that date. We'll give you, how's another 2 weeks to do it? So doing those ADL forms and the function reports are very important. And then it's just not something that I would ever recommend doing all at once. It's 8 pages of like, some detailed information. And if it's the claimant filling them out, it's a person with a disability and they're struggling already. Like that's a lot. It's a lot. So just communicating, making sure I need that, please put that in the note of the case. Also, here's my direct number. If I'm an advocate, helping, here's my direct number. If anything is needed, if they come across and they can't find a medical record, some doctor's offices, anything, you call me, contact me, and I will get you what you need. Because I used to do that like 15, 16 years ago. I used to do this job and your caseload is insane. Our caseload was insane back then, but now I can't even imagine it because and all you want to do is determine claims. You don't care about denying them or approving them. And honestly, like you can kind of root for some people and you're like, man, I was so close to approving this claim, but I'm missing this piece of information. But you can't, your caseload stacks up because you have to go beyond a point to disprove the claim, to deny the claim. You can't just like, well, I'm tired of working on it. So you're like, I want information. I want an active participant in this process because it helps me look good. It helps me do my job. So constantly, responding these requests and getting them updates on where you are in the process and when you'll have the forms to them and all that. It's just I can't tell you how important that is because it gives you a little bit of agency, like you're helping on your claim, but it also tells that other person, hopefully that is doing the job with some kind of sense of they're helping people out. They can get into that, like, okay, I've got all these other people that totally ignore my request and aren't doing anything. Then I've got this other person who's like, what do you need? I get it. Like I'll go to my doctor's office and make sure they reply to this request. You need me to go to another appointment to get more evidence and get them to notes. I'm in. I'll do it. Um, so and then on that note, and kind of like my final tip would be, this is 2025, and from the people at the local field office to the people at DDS, they are extremely busy and they have a tiny workforce that's shrinking all the time. And so whenever I talk to anybody on the phone, I am saccharine sweet. I am so like, polite and respectful. And I tell them like, man, I really appreciate I know you guys are really worked hard. I want to leave that call with that person on the call with the sense that, like I'm somebody who's worth helping. The people that my client is worth helping, so I can't tell you how easy it is for a claim just to fall off the cliff of, at the field office. Oh, we lost your facts, like we didn't get any fact. I don't know, like, or you've waited on hold for an hour just to talk to somebody, and then you're rude, and oops, call got disconnected. Like, what are you gonna file a complaint on that person? You have no idea who that worker was. You don't even know where they were based. So just being like aware of the situation that they're in and you don't have to be sincere about it. You might like be super frustrated with this field office that is totally dysfunctional and the people are you might get a worker that's extremely rude or terse, it's succinct, like and not listening to you. Like, don't give in to like giving that energy back to them. It's like just be, you know, as professional and respectful and kind as you can in order to get, you know, your stuff done as well as they can do it. So that's I'm pretty much that's going to be it. So I got the useful resources, the link for the blue book, um, and field office locator, and then the link to download any of those SSA forms, and you can go through them. There's a lot of, like Lois had said, some of these, they're just really good forms and they ask really good questions. As a social worker, if I'm doing like a psychosocial intake, I'm going to use a lot of those questions to really dig into who a person is and where they come from. And it's just a lot of useful information. So, and it's out there, it's free to download and incorporate into your own practice and stuff. So, oh, let's see, one last thing. And then there's my contact information.